Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
I would just like again to introduce you now that we have the recorder on, say and tell you on behalf of the audience here to thank you for your time. I had the opportunity to introduce you before. It's a big honor and privilege that you're here with us. We're very interested in what you have to say. We always read you. Thank you very much for sharing your time.
Okay, Shkayach, thank you all, and I'm honored you came out this Sunday afternoon. What I want to speak about today, I think we titled it, at least I know, I saw the description or the title, and also Jewish theology regarding this religion. Now, Islam, when it comes on the scene in the 7th century, is a new phenomenon, the like of which never before existed for Jews. Until the rise of Islam in the 7th century, every religion Jews had come into contact with was regarded by them as a religion of Avodah Zarah, without question. Now, the interesting thing of Avodah Zarah, it's usually translated as idolatry. We're going to talk soon about Christianity versus Islam. Now, Christianity, as far as Jews are concerned, is definitely Avodah Zarah, but it's not idolatry. They don't worship idols. So it's best perhaps to have the correct translation, foreign worship. And foreign worship can encompass actual worship of idols, idolatry. But foreign worship can be all sorts of other things. Now, in later years, we find a more nuanced view with regard to Christianity. I don't know, did Rabbi Yonasan in his Shirim on Avodah Zarah discuss the idea of Shituf? Yes. Okay, so you're all bakim in what Shituf is, but for those who maybe aren't, the idea that for Jews who need to have a pure belief in one God, it's forbidden, but non-Jews, they can believe in God associated with another being. That's what's called Shituf. Now, the big question is when this idea develops. There is a Tosfos who mentions it, but if you look at the academic historians, and not just the academic historians, also the Noda B'Yehuda, but not the Noda B'Yehuda, actually the son. It's in the Noda B'Yehuda, but Shmuel Landau, they say very convincingly, I think, that the Tosfos doesn't really mean that theologically non-Jews can believe in Shituf. It's just a technical thing about causing an oath. I had an interesting discussion with David Berger, not just a discussion in public about this. I don't know if he's ever spoken here, but so he's written about this, and he said that, that Shituf, it's clear that Tosfos wasn't putting forth a theological idea that it's permitted for non-Jews. But on the other hand, the Ramah, Ramosh Esselis, the Ashkenazi Shulchan Aruch, he assumes that Noach Einam Nisarim al Shituf, and therefore Christianity is a kosher, acceptable religion for non-Jews. So I asked him, it's interesting, so I said, David Berger, anyone, if we're convinced academically that the Ramah is wrong, that this is what Tosfos meant, can you still rely on him, halacha l'maisa, because he is our posek, and he thought you could. I'd be curious to hear what Rabbi Yonasan has to say about this.
What does it mean academically that it's not really shituf?
Well, no, that the Ramah and others are wrong. Tosfos never intended it to mean that it's okay for the non-Jews. But can you still rely on it? Because after all, he's the Ramah. Now, I think it's a difference, incidentally. What? Well, I mean, the different halachas about is it acceptable religion? Can you have to tell a non-Jew that he can't worship Christianity or anything? There's all sorts. Is it Sheva Mitzvah or something? There's a lot of implications. Well, it could be a practical question. If they don't observe Sheva Mitzvah, then you may have a chiyuv to tell them that. There could be other implications.
Can you donate to a church?
Are they an Oved Avodah Zarah?
This is
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. You want to say something? Take the mic.
Mordechai Horowitz's
yes,
question.
The Mate Levi. So, in fact, he assumes that. So, if it's a kosher religion for them, then yes, you might be able to donate to a church. It's interesting because I think that we all would agree, for instance, that if it's a factual matter, like I was told once by a posek that Rav Avad Yosef, he rules halacha l'maisa, you can eat all gelatin, and he says the only reason he could say that is because he never actually was in a plant. He doesn't know gelatin. So, if it's a factual thing, that's one thing, but if it's an interpretation, I'm sure many of you know the Ramban at the introduction to Mechamos that he says that, in understanding matters, Talmudic matters, we don't have actual proofs. So you could say, okay, David Berger's convinced that this isn't what he meant, but it's not actually a proof. But if it's actual proof, if the posek says X, but factually it's Y, then I don't think anyone can rely on him. But in any event, this idea of Shituf, certainly, even if it's not a medieval idea, it's existing since the Ramah and onwards. But you didn't have this idea in the medieval period, this middle ground between Avodah Zarah, monotheism, and what non-Jews it's permissible for them, but not for Jews. That's a later development. So in the days of the Rishon, in the days, let's say, when Islam comes on the scene, everyone assumes that Christianity is Avodah Zarah, and here you have a new religion. A religion that, without question, is monotheistic. In fact, its God is the same, really, it's the Jewish God. You shouldn't really speak about worship of Allah, it's worship of God. In fact, if you look at, Zelig said I should give some text, so I brought you some interesting texts. If you look at Rav Sadia Gaon's Perush on Chumash, it's actually, turn to page 2 in this. Actually, page 1, you see how, this is just from Shmos, but you can pull it up anywhere. He says the fourth word, you see where he says Elohim, God's name. But turn to the next page, and you see how it is in the Arabic. Judeo-Arabic is just Arabic and Hebrew writing. You see it there as Allah. So Christians and Jews and Christians refer to God by that term. So, okay, so one God.
Using the word God, it's the same thing.
Exactly. Although many people today assume it's something different and they just want to distinguish, but here you see it. Now, we're obviously today in what we call an ecumenical era. We want everyone to get along. We try not to cast judgments, at least not in the public sphere. But the fact is that matters in pre-modern times were cast much more starkly. Obviously, Jews thought that they're right and everyone else is wrong, and every religion thought the same thing. And that's why people were willing to give up their lives. This is something we're going to get to later for their religion. The concept of religious martyrdom has no significance if you adopt a certain relativistic view, Gandhi's sort of view, that all religions are equal. They're all true with a small t. It's just different flavors, different. Everyone's influenced by their environment. You grow up one way, so this religion is true for you. They get you to the same place. No one's going to martyr themselves, and we know that martyrdoms, there's a chiyuv of martyrdom in certain times. So no one's going to martyr themselves. Not only do they martyr, people killed their children, which halachically is very problematic. Very problematic. I don't know if we're going to discuss this at all to see how this could be justified. But again, the relativistic Gandhi sort of view that all religions are pretty much the same, that doesn't lead people to doing that. Now, in the modern world, however, we all recognize religion is a private affair. We all meet in the middle. It's like a secular sphere we meet in, and then we revert in our private lives to our own religions. But we meet in an equal, or it should be equal sphere, a secular sphere in the middle. And in a modern Western society, no religion is supposed to be favored. It's a secular sphere where we do what we need to do. But that's only a modern idea. In the pre-modern context, by definition, your status, your social status, your political status, depended on your religion. By definition, if you were a member of the dominant religion, you were up here. And if you were the tolerated religion, and actually if you were a tolerated religion, that's pretty good. Because, the ones who weren't tolerated were wiped out a long time ago. But you were understood and to be second class. And no one thought anything of it. It was expected. Jews assumed, of course, they're going to be second class. It's only with the rise of modernity and the idea of a secular sphere that Jews and Muslims or Christians, depending on which country, could say, no, we should be treated equally. It was understood you would be treated equally. In fact, some of you might even know the famous Chasam Sofer, when about emancipation. He explains why we're opposed to emancipation. He said you can't actually be rude to the king if he wants to give it to you, but at the end of the day, we don't want emancipation.
We want to be get touch from.
Yeah, yes, we want to. He gave the example, if a king exiles his son because he's annoyed with him, the son's always waiting to be brought back. But if one day the king sends a lot of money to build him his own palace out in exile, the king's not going to be happy, because then the son's not going to be happy. He's realizing the king's not bringing him back anytime soon. The fact that we're getting such a good life in the exile, that could be a sign that the redemption isn't coming anytime soon. So, but in the modern world, we have this sort of equality. However, in the pre-modern context, like I said, where your status was determined by your religion, by definition, the religions were set off against one another. If you're the dominant religion, you're up here, and you're the tolerated religion, you're below. And now speak about Islam. You all know this about Christianity, but it's the same with Islam. Both Judaism and Islam claim to be heirs to the promises. The promises to Abraham, to Abraham. And asserting the truth of one means the other is false. There couldn't be two heirs to these promises. There could only be the Jews or the Muslims. Now, many in Islam accuse the Jews of falsifying Scripture. Falsifying the Torah. Yes, we had a revelation. but there's a whole doctrine, it's called Tachrif, that originally the Torah, the revelation given to Moses, contained allusions, references to Muhammad, and this was all removed. So what Jews have, yes, Jews have a revelation, and Muslims have to give honor to Jews and Christians for their revelation, but also they recognize in quotes you could say, that it has been distorted. It's been distorted in Christianity, primarily with the idea of the man God, that Jesus is a God, is God. Jews, the distortion came with the alteration of the text and everything that went along with this. Now, this is a worthwhile topic. There's a whole book even by a woman scholar in Israel, Miriam Adang, about this idea, and others have written on it, but I'm not going to focus on it. What I want to deal with, like I said, is how Jews related to Islam, not how Islam related to Jews, although that's very interesting, but I want to deal with how Jews related to Islam, in particular Jewish law, theology, etc. Now, it's very important in the medieval period, before that even, to determine the halachic status of the various religions. We already mentioned Jews were called upon, and especially in Christian Europe, to give up their lives. Kiddush Hashem. And rather than convert to Christianity. Was this, when you're dealing with Islam in the Islamic world, is this called for? And if so, why? Because as we're going to see in the Almohad persecution, Jews were also given the choice, convert to Islam or die. And why would anyone even have a Havamina thought if Islam is completely monotheistic? Well, this brings us to a great dispute as to why there should be an obligation to martyr yourself. Remember, you all know this, but just to review, obviously there's three big things where normally we say, Yavar Vayhareg, three Yavar, someone says kill someone else, murder someone else, or certain sexual immoralities, or of course, Avodah Zarah. Now why? Well, why is it with Avodah Zarah? So there's two approaches here actually. The Rambam's approach, which we'll see, is that the Maisa Avodah Zarah is so terrible. The act of, let's say, bowing to the cross or something like that is so terrible that it requires Kiddush Hashem. Well, if this is the understanding, then if you're dealing with a religion that has no Avodah Zarah, then there wouldn't be a need for martyrdom. Again, there's no Maisa Avodah Zarah. And we'll get back to the Rambam. Another approach, and everyone knows the Rambam's approach, it's famous, but there's another approach. And you said the Radbaz, but who's the Radbaz quoting? You remember Rabbi Berger?
Nope.
It's not Radbaz, he adopts this, but it's not his original. He's quoting the Ritva. It goes back to the Ritva. And according to, this is how and we'll read the Ritva inside in a second. This is how I would explain the Ritva's position, which I think it directly from his words, that the issue is not the Maisa Avodah Zarah. The Maisa Avodah Zarah is the outward manifestation. The issue is denial of the Torah. The capital offense is rejection of the Torah. The manifestation of that is through Avodah Zarah. You show you reject the Torah. And when Chazal were speaking about, people who reject the Torah, the example they gave is did Avodah Zarah. That shows you reject the Torah. But it's not the Maisa Avodah Zarah. It's the rejection of the Torah. And now we see the nafkamina. Because if you're it's a simon, exactly. Because now if you're dealing with a religion like Islam that's completely monotheistic, there's no Avodah Zarah, the Ritva says it's still a case of Yahari Vel Yavar, because to become a Muslim means you reject the Torah. And that's the real problem. And let's see inside the Ritva. We'll see it right here.
You have it here.
We have it right here. The Ritva says, this is on Pesachim. The Chasavod, because he's quoted, the Ritva is being quoted. Vevi Yadea, probably said Yadua maybe. Shemunas Yishmaelim, Afal Pish Yachtim, even know that they are monotheists. Nevertheless, it's considered Avodah Zarah. What's the Avodah Zarah? Why is that the status of Avodah Zarah? That you have to be Yaharig? Sharei Hamoda B'munasam Kofer B'Toras Moshe. She'ena Emes Kamoshi B'Yadenu. Because when you become a Muslim, that by definition means, what does it mean to be a Muslim? By the way, you say if you say it one time, Yeshana, with feeling. There's no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. But this means that the Quran is the truth and the Torah is falsified. By saying that, you're saying the Torah is false. So the Ritva says, by definition, if you accept this, you're kofar b'Toras Moshe. That's not true. Kamoshi, he's biyadenu. In other words, maybe years ago the Muslims have said you had truth, but our Torah now is a false Torah. So that's that is the status of Avodah Zarah. It's the same thing. He says all those cases, like if someone says, violate Shabbos, build me a house or something, they could be saying because they want, or even to make you, they want you to violate the law. However, if they're saying it, so the whole point is that you violate it to show that you reject the Torah is false. That would be the same thing. You'd have to Yahar Vayavar. And then it says Umir Bar Michol Dain Hechad of Hesed Vayavar. And there's another question which comes up in the Geras HaShamad we'll speak about. When it's Befar Hesia, already we assume that anything, even Arkas Adam Masana. So that's a big problem with the Geras HaShamad. But look in the note here, 145. He cites the Rambam. What does the Rambam say? Shakasher hu rak hoda b'dibur b'shlichus oso ha'ish yavor. He quotes the Geras HaShamad. The Rambam says otherwise. When all you need to do, second page Nun Ches. When all you need to do is acknowledge the existence of Muhammad. So what's the problem? We're lying. We're saying we believe Muhammad is the prophet, but we don't really believe it. For that, there's no Yahar V'Ever. So it's a fundamental difference, as I see it, in how to understand the issue of Avodah Zarah. Is it a simon, right? We said a simon, a sima. It's the outward manifestation of denial of the Torah, or do you need the actual Maisa? So we have this dispute between the Rambam and the Ritva, and as Rabbi Berger mentioned, the Radbaz quotes that as well.
Who writes the Kusavoid?
This is we don't have actually the Ritva. The Ritva is quoted. So we have the Ritva. So this has taken from the Ritva being quoted.
Is it by default because I believe in one, I don't believe in something else? When you believe in one thing, by default you don't believe in the other? Or?
Say, hold on, I can't hear you. It's the Radbaz quotes it. Yeah.
Pass
I
the
think
mic,
we also have other things. Yeah.
Is it because the Quran is meant to replace the Bible, or anytime someone believes in a different thing, it's by default he's not believing in this, so he would go out.
It doesn't have to be the Quran per se. If someone says, let's say, do something and say something or violate something, and it's just stam, that's not the issue. But if by doing it, you have to acknowledge, for instance, that you reject the Torah.
That's his example.
If I violate Shabbos, I believe in the Torah, but I want to save my life, and you want me, even if you want me to violate the Torah, that doesn't raise to the level. But if it means that I'm rejecting the Torah, if I accept Islam, it's monotheistic, but by accepting it, I'm saying that the Torah is a false document. That is a capital offense. That requires, according to the Ritva, and the Ritva agrees, that requires Yahar V'Yavor, but the Rambam says no, as he explains very nicely in the note. Shaker sher hu rak hoda b'dibur. When it's just by dibur, there's no Maisa, then you don't have to. The whole issue in Morocco, we're going to see about the Geras HaShamad, really comes down to this issue of, and there's other implications as well.
The Rambam's own experience.
And the Rambam's own experience I'll talk about, and the Holocaust, Rabbi Ashri, we'll get to this hopefully.
Wait a second. One person at a time, please, with the mic. Please. With the mic, thank you. Otherwise, it becomes a jungle. We have a big crowd here. Thank you. With the mic.
Just a comment that the source from the Ritva that Hamatzia out to be Yadayni is from the Rambam, and say that this is considered a major tenet. That the Rambam is the one that comes up with this concept that we have to believe that everything we have today is directly from Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu is the final Novi. That's very strong for the Rambam.
I know the Rambam says it, but he's not. Without the Rambam, we would also believe it. I think. Well, not the final. Well, someone wrote a book once about
it seems like it's wrong. That's what I'm saying. That it is barring
but he's not. It's not about the final nevuah. It's about denial of the Torah as being authentic. That's the issue. The question you raised, the interesting question, is so what about the next Navi? Now, Muhammad could be a Navi and he could override it. We're going to see how the Rambam replies to this themselves.
One second. Anybody else wants to say something or question, asking? Okay.
If not, write it down, and at the end we'll come back to it. Now, to be sure, there were Jews who were not strong enough to allow themselves to be martyred. Let's say in the Christian world, everyone knew this has happened. If you come on my trip to Spain or to Portugal, we talk a lot about this. In fact, we have amazing evident. I mean, the Sfardim like to hold it over us, Ashkenazim, that in many ways that they're better in certain things, and it's true. But on other things, the Ashkenazim have it. We all know that in France, in Germany, in England, people died al Kiddush Hashem, and it happened all over. And yet, when you come to Spain, you have a different phenomenon. You have from 1391, the beginnings of the Great Persecution, really until 1492, you have mass conversions. Now, in 1391, there was chant save your life, but after that, throughout the whole 15th century, it wasn't about people dying. Judaism was a recognized religion. It was people wanted to advance. So you had enormous amounts of conversion. Then when the expulsion came, you had lots more who could decide to convert, including the so-called chief rabbi of Spain. We have cases where the entire communities convert to Christianity. Apparently, even the rabbis.
Rivash.
And the Rivash, yes, Rivash would be, since you bring it up. But you don't have this in the Ashkenazic world. Entire communities just converted, and there's a whole discussion why. Yitzhak Be'er, he blamed Averroism, that they became so involved in philosophy that when push came to shove, they weren't willing to lay down their lives. Or Yosef Yavitz actually says the same thing. He says that the mitpalsafim, the self-styled philosophers, they didn't believe strongly in Judaism, so they didn't believe in Christianity. It didn't really matter. But it was the simpletons who were willing to be exiled, etc. But okay, Averroism, philosophy. Averroism is a type of Aristotelian type of philosophy, but that's the term he used. Say philosophy. Now, but everyone understood. So no one thought that these people were evil who converted, but it was understood, let's say we're talking now in the Christian world, that it was a sin. It was, you were a sin, you had sinned because you should have died al Kiddush Hashem, and when you're able to leave and come to North Africa or the Ottoman Empire and return to Judaism, there were penances that had to be done. They assigned them different sorts of tshuva they had to do, because really, again, we don't view them as evil, but they behaved incorrectly, and now you have certain tshuvas, could be malchus, whatever they thought about. There's all sorts of things. Different things they had to do. So the question we'll see. So obviously, but that's the question with Christianity. So this is also going to have a practical nafkamina about Islam. We're going to see in Morocco. If you're living under a regime, the same sort of regime, and you have to convert a guy, and you choose to live outwardly as Muslim, are you sinning or not? So we'll get to that. But the basic issue, the basic problem that the rabbis had to confront with this, of course, is whether the various rules in the Gemara about Avodah Zarah, and those of you, Rabbi Berger sent me just one or two from Rabbi Yonasson's Daf Yomi Shiurim, so I'm sure all of you who go to the Shiurim are much more bucky in all of Avodah Zarah rules than myself. So now, because those Shiurim are really something, let me tell you, I've never seen anything like it. This combination of academic scholarship and traditional learning, it's quite unique, I have to say. The only problem is I can't listen to it because my Yiddish, it's not my Mama Lashon, but I can read it. So one day if they put everything on a website by each daf, it'll be a big help.
Every share has the written. On YouTube,
I know, but you can't go, you got to a good website and you plug in each daf and it'll be right there. That'll make it much easier. But the basic problem the rabbis had to consider, we're talking now the Gaonic period, is whether, of course, Avodah Zarah applied to Islam. For a while, we already saw, it's completely monotheistic, but it did deny the revelation of Sinai as we see it, and it could be that places you in the same category. Now, according to the Gemara also, it's important, we all know that there's Shev Mitzvah Noach, and one of them forbids Avodah Zarah. Now, in certain respect, these laws were obviously theoretical, because throughout history, the Jews were always the oppressed ones at the bottom. You didn't have non-Jews coming to the rabbis and asking, am I living my life in accord with the Noahide laws? With one exception, maybe. They had the in the end of the Roman Empire, you had what Josephus calls the God-fearers. These are people who wanted something more out of religion, something ethical. Roman religion was clearly not going to give it to them, but they weren't actually going all the way to convert. Certainly, we can understand with circumcision, etc. So you have these people called the God-fearers. But you see occasionally, apparently there's a community down by Memphis who are Noachides, and they call rabbis. The Lubavitch had the whole thing about this. They even got President Reagan to declare Noachide Law Day. I had a guy, I worked at a Catholic university, so I had a Chabadnik call me up once because they each of them has their shlichus, and his shlichus was Shev Mitzvah Pnei Noach. So he wanted to come to my university, but the thing is, I couldn't let him because I don't know. For all I know, he doesn't hold of shituf. So he's going to come into my university, Catholic University, and tell everyone I'm going to sponsor it, and tell everyone, you can't do what you're doing, and can't do that. Now, I always thought, by the way, that these Noachides were eccentric, because if you're convinced that the Torah is true, you will do what people throughout history have done. You'll convert. It's true that it's great that there are people who are moral, who are Noachides, but that's just because they're moral people. But if they actually know that the Torah is true and they believe it, why would they remain a Noachide like that? The one example we know of was, I don't know if you know of Ben Amozeg in Italy. He had a student there who wanted to convert, a non-Jewish student, and he said to him, no, you remain non-Jewish so you can spread the Noachides, Pallier. But generally, this doesn't really work, and because what does it mean to be Noachide? There's no Shabbos. There's no kashrus. It's all things you don't do. By the way, according to the Gemara, you don't have to believe in God to be a Noachite. It doesn't say that. The Rambam includes that. But so it's there's nothing to bind you to the Torah. You're not connected to it. You're totally on the outside. So I get it. Why? So for the non-Jews, it's not like they're coming to us, but Jews needed to know about these religions, what their status were, and everything. Because if they're of Avodah Zarah, if this is a religion of Avodah Zarah, there's all sorts of laws. The whole Masechus Avodah Zarah deals with this, that we need to know. Gemara teaches us, Chazal tell us, that with people who are of the Avodah Zarah, we relate to them one way, others we relate another way. So it's very important for the Rabbanim, here we're talking the Gaonic period, to know the status of all the different religions, but they're very careful. They're allowed to study, Avodah Zarah and all that, because they need to make the laws. The rest of the people, they're told they're not allowed to, but there's a heter to study it for the people who need to know. And there's all sorts of implications. Business dealings you learned when you studied Avodah Zarah, even though they practically became impossible in the Ashkenazic world. More modern questions: can you wish your neighbor good wishes on his holiday if the name of the holiday, if you use the name of the holiday and it's an Avodah Zarah? You can come up with all sorts of answers, questions that relate to this. And the problem that the Gaonic, in the Gaonic period, and early Rishonim had when they dealt with this matter, was in attaining a proper knowledge of Islam. And what we find is all sorts of statements where they didn't understand what the religion was all about. Now, obviously, to give a proper ruling, you have to know what they call the Metzios. And we find very interestingly that early authorities, great Rabbanim, simply didn't know the Metzios. And I'll give you some examples of this. I'll share with you a very interesting Achron who recognized this. So, for instance, we find a number of early references to Islam as idolatrous. Not just Avodah Zarah, but real mamish idolatry. And this was due to the widespread mistaken perception that in the Kaaba in Mecca, there was we'll get to that, there was an idol to be found there. Now the Kaaba you're never going to see it in person, because in Mecca it's this big, but go on YouTube, you'll see the big black structure in the middle of Mecca. When they go on the pilgrimage, they do the revolutions. I say you'll never see it in person, because non-Muslims are actually not allowed to go there. You can go look online, you can see the highway. The highway actually says non-Muslims go off. And it was a big Chil Hashem a few years ago when the Israeli reporter undercover went there. Just imagine for a minute if Israel were to make a rule that, let's say, in the old city, the Jewish quarter or something, non-Jews are not allowed in, what the world would be saying. But as we speak in Saudi Arabia today, non-Muslims are not allowed in Mecca, and no churches or synagogues are allowed to be built in the country. So, you won't see it in person, but you can see it online. Now, there was a shrine there. In pre-Islamic days, the pilgrimage exists prior to this. There was a pagan shrine there in pre-Islamic days, and when Muhammad took over, he purged the paganism there. In fact, some scholars believe, they offer maybe what you want to call Marxist interpretation. If you know the history, here, let me share a little bit. Muhammad gets his revelation. It's a monotheistic idea, and he starts spreading his word, and there's a lot of opposition to him in Mecca. In fact, from the merchant class. And why is there such opposition? Just because he's preaching a different message? So one theory advanced is that Mecca was a place of pilgrimage, and they're coming to the idols that were in the shrine there as part of their pagan ritual. If he is successful in his monotheistic message, that will be the end of all the paganism. That'll be the end of the pilgrimage. They'll be driven to bankruptcy. So that's why they oppose them. Now, Muhammad is forced to leave, actually. He leaves Mecca, and he goes to a place called Yathrib. Today we know Yathrib as Medina, and he begins to gather his forces there, and eventually comes back and he takes over Mecca, but he cleanses it of the paganism, the idols, but he doesn't abolish the pilgrimage. He keeps it. In fact, according to the Quran, Abraham built the Kaaba, and the pilgrimage began with Abraham. So I guess everyone's happy then. Now, not surprisingly, as time goes on, the position solidifies among Jewish scholars living in the Islamic world that Islam is not idolatry. And I think this is obvious. It had to be, as they learn more about the
Who's
religion.
the first one to say it is idolatry? Who is that reference you were saying?
Well, you have certain Gonim. Nachshon and others, they speak about it, yeah. And
You bring it down here?
no, I don't bring it down here.
So they believe that
They say it's Avodah Zarah.
they believe the idol remained after.
Yes, I think there's an idol there. We're talking about Mercurius. I mean, apparently the person who disagrees with the Rambam. Now, we'll soon see what the Rambam has to say about this. It took longer for those living outside the Islamic lands to recognize what Islam is all about. So let me give you an example. The Muslims, when they shecht, they put the head of the animal directed towards Mecca, and there's any number of chuvos about this, what to do. Jews would have to shecht. They had all the animals, and Jews would go and shecht there, and then they would give, let's say, the trephus or the hindquarters, they'd give it to the Muslims, and they would force the Jews to push the animal in a certain direction, even to say Allah Akbar. And Rav Kook has a tshuva on this, and he says, of course, it's not a good thing, but if you have to do that, yet, because what is Allah Akbar? God is great. It's not such a problem. So the Rashba has a tshuva about this, where the Jew shechting in the Arab place, and again, putting the head facing Mecca. So they forced the Jews, as I said, to do the same thing that they did. And the Rashba says, if you can abolish it, do it, because we don't want to be part of this Muslim practice. But it's technically not an issue. And even if the Muslim owns the cows, it could be, it's not clear from the tshuva whether the Muslim owns the cows or the Jew owns the cows, but then gives it to the Muslim. It wouldn't be an issue, because it doesn't matter what the owner is thinking. It matters what the shochet is thinking. This goes back to Chulin, where it says if the owner thinks it's for Avodah Zarah and the person shechting doesn't think so, that's what we go by. But so we see here that the Rashba assumes that it's Avodah Zarah, because he says it doesn't matter what they think, it matters what the shochet thinks. So he assumes it's Avodah Zarah. So I found something really interesting in the Yad Yehuda. The Yad Yehuda is Yehuda Landau.
Can you explain what is the ritual of turning the head towards Mecca?
They just the head of the animal.
That they're saying we're
shechted.
sacrificing for Mecca?
Well,
What
they think it's just a sign.
No. But what does it mean?
It means that nothing, just like they pray to Mecca.
The cow prays to Mecca?
No, but
Sure,
we're doing a
Mecca?
religious ritual, so it should be to Mecca. It's like
So then there's an essence of the avoid the dark derech avodah zura, but avoid this avodah zura. You understand? Like you kill an animal for Mecca.
No. It's just a sign. It's just like we turn east when we daven. That's what it is. But let me read to you, that's what the Yad Yehuda, who someone said from Sadegor.
He was a Rav Sadegor.
Okay, was he a chassid, by the way?
No, the Chassidim he told the Rishna to fast,
Yeah.
and he died from that fast.
Oh,
So,
okay. So, but I mean, his sefer is on Shlita. It's considered a very important sefer. I want to read you now. I didn't make a copy of it. I should have made a copy, but I didn't. I just read you and listen to what he says. So I don't know if this is indicative of his way of thinking in other areas as well. Let me read it to you. Basically, we see his judgment that Rashba didn't know the facts. It's very unusual, I think, to speak about a Rishon this way, perhaps. He says as follows. Bevadai Adonenu Harashba lo haya baki yafa bezeh. V'neman hu bal prichoda she'amar shachakar yafa bezeh ve'en kan shum shemetz avodah zarah bezeh. Rak adarabah l'shamayim k'mosh anu ispalim etzad mizrach. Basically, that it's we're facing east and daven, so too they shecht, they face to Mecca. Im kain ein shum davar bazer rak tzas yisur mishum b'chosem roserechu. It's a little isser. We couldn't do it ourselves. But if the only way you can get kosher meat is doing it, okay, you can find a heter. And then listen to this: ve'ein hashkiach al davar shenimtza be'eza kadmon. Asher lo haya baki bazeh hetev. He says, don't pay attention to what you see. He's talking about the Rashba here. Don't pay attention just because you see a Rishon says something. If the Rishon doesn't know what he's talking about, doesn't have the facts, we can ignore it. And he doesn't even say b'mechilas kavod or anything. He just says the Rashba didn't know what he's talking about. It wasn't Baki, and we don't have to pay attention. So again,
Who's writing this again?
This is the Yad Yehuda.
Which is?
Landau from Sadagura. He's a
they're
standard
there.
book on Shlita. He died, I think, in 1900.
He quotes the Pri Chodesh. What language does the Pri Chodesh use?
I didn't even check the Pri Chodesh, though. Many people discuss this issue of facing when they shecht and they say it's not an
I'm
issue.
wondering how he relates to the Rashba.
Oh, it could be a good question. I have to check it. The Pri Chodesh might also use language like that, and then I guess it's kosher for him to do the same thing. Interesting. So that's quite apart from the issue we're dealing with. It's the way into a rishon. I'm a little surprised in that language. Okay, you had something?
One second. I can't share, man.
It sounds like a very strong statement, but on this subject, there's always, and let's say the Dval, the Chivas that they found recently, has a similar question about this shechting. One of the challenges of this was because we're not allowed to shech l'seidim,
Yeah.
right? So one of the people thought that this is like shechting l'seidim because you're pointing it in that direction. Now, I could find like hundreds of Chivas that they always write that, they didn't understand exactly what the people are doing. Not something as big as Islam, but saying on an earlier person that they didn't understand the situation on the ground or what these people are doing is a very commonplace thing in Chivas. To say that they just
We're not
didn't
talking
know
about we're talking about a basic theological idea of the religion, the dominant religion, the second big
writes it
religion.
about his father.
Yeah.
He writes such a thing.
Yeah.
Like it was something that the women there would like chef the chicken for some iron hara, and he says my father didn't realize that it's not whatever, they're not really doing this, etc.
Okay, but I think it's all different. By Ramosha Feinstein asking about the case of Ethiopian Jews, he says, the Radbaz says from Don, he says maybe he didn't have all the facts. Okay, again, that's different, I think, than I think this is more fundamental. It's much bigger, and also his language is a little sharper, I think. He says, the Rashbam, lo haya baki yafa b'zeh. And he says, it doesn't matter just because of Rishon. I think it's...
Rashba live in Muslim lands?
No, Christian.
It was Christian?
Yeah.
Christian Spain?
Yeah.
Andalus?
Yeah. It was all Muslim, but then it was the
Later,
reconquest.
after
The reconquest. Now, before coming to the Rambam on Islam, I want to remind you what he says in the Mishnah Torah at the end, Havas Malachim, about Christianity and Islam. Because it's interesting, the Mishnah Torah, it's not just a code of law. He has all these passages which show that it's much more than a code of law. You can't imagine things like this in the Shulchan Aruch. But at the end of, which used to be censored, but it's in all the Mishnah Torahs now, he says that, although, of course, Islam and Christianity are in error, they have, in the Hashgacha Pratis, they have a value in that they prepare the world to eventually accept the true religion. Does this mean everyone's going to convert to Judaism or just the Noahide code? It's not clear. And he says that, that's what he says. All the matters relating to Jesus of Nazareth, he doesn't have to say Yashka. He says the name. And the Ishmaelite, that's Muhammad, who rose after him, are only to make straight the path for the Messianic king. What does that mean, make straight the path? So in the Rambam's conception, you have the civilized world and the uncivilized world. And I don't know what he knew about what's going on in India or China, but certainly you have the Islamic world and the Christian world. And in the Christian world, they, first of all, they all believe in the idea of prophecy. So that's already in advance from previous times. And the Christian world, they share what we call the Old Testament, the Tanakh. It's just that they have the New Testament, they have a theological problem, their idea of God. But they've advanced. And the Muslim world, their theology is pure. They believe in one God. So they've advanced also. So when the Messiah comes, the Messianic era, we're already halfway there. Christians need to be corrected on their theology, and the New Testament, no. And the Muslims, they already have the right theology, so they need to be told about Torah. So the Rambam sees this as part of on the Messianic path. Now, I don't know, does anyone know who said this before the Rambam? Yehuda Levi says the exact same thing in the Kuzari. So I always assume that the Rambam is maybe influenced, but if you look at Rav Kafach, we're going to speak to Rav Kafach in 2 weeks, so he's known by the Rambam, but he also translated Yehuda Levi. And with notes, and in his note he says that the Rambam never mentions Yehuda Levi, so he doesn't think he knows anything about him. He says this must have just been an idea in the air that the Rambam is recording. Zeitgeist, exactly. That's what Rav Kafach says. The Rambam, this is what the Kuzari says. Kuzari is also written in Arabic, that he says that all of that, let me read you word for word. So he says, these religious communities, namely the Christians and Muslims, are only a preparation and prelude to the Messiah. And then he says, after that, the tree will be, all will acknowledge him, and the tree will become one. These branches will become one. Again, does that mean everyone's going to convert to Judaism? Or does that mean no, that they'll just recognize there's one and recognizing one God? And if you look in rabbinic literature throughout the ages, I think we see two different visions of the future. Is everyone going to become Jewish? I think most people would assume not. Okay.
Where does it specifically say this?
Book 4, 23, section 23. Now the Rambam actually says in the Chuvos that you can teach Torah to Christians, but not to Muslims. He says because Muslims don't believe that we have the correct text. They don't accept our text, so they think it's a fraud. We have no common ground. But Christians accept the text, so at least we could study with them and point out their errors. Like they come up with all their different drashos, like Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. 3 is 1, that sort of thing. So we could point it out and show them their mistakes. But the Muslims don't accept our text, so we can't
accept our text entirely or portions?
No, they don't think it's correct. It's been corrupted. It's been corrupted.
What
correct.
does it mean that we can? The practical?
No, it's about the Gemara. The Gemara says you can't teach non-Jews Torah. It's halacha. So the Rambam says it doesn't apply to the Christians.
Because they believe they're not considered
Because they believe. No, they're not. When the Gemara says you can't teach non-Jews Torah, it doesn't include people who believe in the revelation and believe in the Torah texts and just have mistakes in other matters. So he says you could teach them. But Muslims, you can't teach. Incidentally, the famous tshuva, of course, I just mentioned it because that's my first book. If you see, he says you read my book, so Yaakov Weinberg. He has the famous classic tshuva on teaching non-Jews Torah that he wrote when he was appointed professor at University of Gießen in Germany. How could he be professor? How could he do what I'm doing? So I wrote a tshuva in which he came up with another heter that for intellectual purposes, if it's just for intellectual purposes, it's like he compares it to Shabbos. If a non-Jew just on Saturday wants to rest, that's not a problem. But if he makes it a religion, it's a problem. So if a non-Jew wants to study Torah for theological reasons or whatever, not for intellectual purposes, or if he wants to study for religious reasons, that's a problem. Now, this law, though, I think some people make a mistake in thinking that the Rambam is maybe favoring Christianity or something. And by the way, a lot of people assume that the Rambam didn't know anything about Christianity because he was in the Muslim world. You have people who will see the Rambam thought Christianity is real avodah zarah, even though it's an advance from old paganism. And people have said, including a well-known rabbi, I responded to this in one of my classes, and to his credit in the YouTube, he wrote a comment. Someone told him about it and said, you're right. This rabbi said that he doesn't think the Rambam ever met a Christian in his lifetime, and you have other people say that he didn't know what Christianity was, that's why he said it's avodah zarah. Completely false. To begin with, when the Rambam comes there to Israel, it's a Crusader kingdom. The Christians are running. And then when he was living in Cairo, old Cairo, Fustat, that was a huge Coptic community. Coptics are Christians. So the Rambam knew very well about Christianity. But he's not, Islam is much higher than Christianity for Rambam because they have a pure theology.
So what?
Well, he
I've written about it. He just met Eastern Christians.
Who cares?
Well, why just Eastern Christians?
Why?
Why? The Crusader Kingdom, Crusader Kingdom was Western Christians also.
I think in the 1290 when he was there, I think there were.
I mean, all the people from Europe were there. They were there. There was a Latin Kingdom. Yes. There was a Latin Kingdom. And you had both. You had Eastern and you had Western kingdoms, but it's no different. Eastern and Western doesn't matter. It's the same thing.
Same theology?
Same theology, fundamentally same theology.
It's not clear whom he met when he was in Eretz Yisrael, what he met, when he was there.
No, but he was there. He was living there, and then he lived in Cairo, Coptic.
No, he lived in Cairo, but we don't know anything about the...
No, we don't know about
the whole going to Israel, Rabbi.
Even if he was there, I mean, in that part.
But we know he was there. So he was...
He was intellectually curious. I'm sure he knew
If I
about
can
it.
add,
Yeah.
just like we had a
He
shir
didn't know about
Rabbi
Russia,
Yonatan.
but didn't know about us.
He wasn't surface.
No.
What do you want?
He didn't know about Rashi because it didn't work out time-wise. His son quotes Rashi, Rav Avraham.
I just saw this guy. Shama Friedman and his brother. They made this the Geniza influence. So they both strongly believe that he did know about Russia.
I know, but he never mentions him.
Doesn't-
He has an
doesn't
article
mention-
in there.
Doesn't mention many others, so
He calls him.
that's also debatable if you knew about Russia.
But he mentioned Beferish by the sun. Okay. You're the one to say
I
something?
just wanted to add that we had a Shia. Rami Reiner has a whole theory on the Rambam's pilgrimage up to Israel, that it's part of like what we spoke about earlier, that it just was a ritual of Chiva, the way he says that he was Nislam and Ashmad, and this
Ah.
was,
Okay.
yeah, the B'yanis together
So
Shia.
we'll go get to that in a
But it
couple
covers
minutes.
both elements. It covers the elements of what you said before, that some rabbis accepted Muslim ideas for the purpose of saving themselves and as a permitted way, and also like as a pilgrimage up there to Eretz Yisrael for the Chiva, and also whatever you touched now on the Christianity. The Christians were there, but he was busy doing something else.
But all I would say to that, we'll see in a minute, I don't need Tshuva. He has to leave. So where's he going to go to when he has to leave? So we'll get to that in a second. Now, so Islam is much more favored in the Rambam's eyes, obviously, than Christianity. This is despite the fact that the Rambam refers numerous times negatively, not just, let's say, to Muhammad. He calls Muhammad the crazy man, the Meshuggah. It's not a Yiddish term. It's not it already appears in Tanakh, as we'll see, Meshuggah. And the fact that he regards Christianity as a real Avodah Zarah, even though Avodah Zarah better than the old paganism, but still Avodah Zarah creates obviously crucial distinction. Because if the question we're going to see in Igeres Hashmad was asked about Christianity, it would require Kiddush Hashem. Now, where do we get to what? It's not just the Rambam, by the way. Others also in the medieval period call Muhammad the Meshuggah. So I want to show you where people assume it comes from the following. Well, first of all, Muhammad was accused of being, let's say, taken over by a jinn. A jinn is like this spirit, so maybe that's why I thought he's crazy. But there's a source in Tanakh for this. If you look in all the sources that deal with this, Steinschneider, etc., I believe Steinschneider, by the way, the word Meshuggah appears in Devarim also. But if you look here, is it this week's parsha? Last week. Okay. But this is what they say it comes from. If you look in Pasuk Zion, Nun, it says, Bal Yemei HaPkuda, the days of visitation are come, Bal Yemei HaShilim, Yedu Yisrael, Evio HaNavi, the prophet is a fool, Meshuggah Ish HaRuach, the man of the spirit is mad. So everyone says that the reason why he calls him Meshuggah, or not just the Rambam, others as well, is because of this pasuk where it contrasts, the foolish prophet, the Ish HaRuach, the prophetic figure is a Meshuggah. However, what I'm going to show you now, I mentioned this in a little book I wrote, Studies in Maimonides, which I saw this in one rabbinic text. None of the academic scholars mention this, none of them. And it proves my point that I've been saying for years, that good academic scholarship needs to take into account traditional writings as well. It has to be a synthesis of the best of the traditional commentators and writers. So here is something that none of the great scholars, going back to Steinschneider and all the people dealt with it, ever noticed it. But a traditional Rav, he picked up on this. Look at the previous pasuk. The previous page before. What does it say? The last word on the page. Mahmad al chaspam kimosh yirashem. Treasures of silver, nettle shall possess them. Mahmad. Mahmad is Muhammad. That's how Muhammad is written in medieval literature. It's the fact that Muhammad's name is in the previous verse. That's the parallelism. That's why. It makes sense to me.
Which traditional posek find?
It's not in the posek. It's one of the writers in the rabbinic journals in Or Torah, of Mazuz's thing. Now, by the way, we say in my community and in all the modern Orthodox communities, Friday night we say Yedid Nefesh. We sing it. You guys don't sing Yedid Nefesh, right?
It's started by Sudash.
No, I'm talking about Friday night.
Oh, we sure. We say.
Okay. We never sang it growing up. We never sang it. This started to become popular in the early 1980s. It came from Israel. In Israel, they sang it. Now, the Yedid Nefesh that we have, it's not there's many changes from the original. We actually have the handwritten text of the author. And if you look in the Sack Siddur now, he has both of them. Zikri. And in the Yedid Nefesh, the original reading is as follows, in one of the lines, Ana Eli Mahmad Libi. And what we have, it is Eile Chamda Libi. Rav Mazuz, actually, he has a volume, not volume, a kuntras corrections to the Siddur, comments on the
There was a
Siddur.
lot of controversy back in the day.
Yes, and he says that this was changed because they didn't want to say Mahmad Libi. Because in the Muslim world, to say Mahmad Libi, saying Muhammad's name, it's like if all of a sudden Jesus. Can you imagine? I mean, in Spanish, name their kids Jesus. But can you imagine if we had a word Jesus, we'd have to come up with a different thing. So he said that's why they changed it there from Mahmad Libi to Hamda Libi. Now,
Pusik is Mahmoud Libani. Now, isn't it both on the Pusik? Mahmoud Libani.
yes, but to say it, there's nothing wrong with the words. But for in the Muslim world to be saying this every week, it's a problem. Now, the Rambam refers to Muhammad in a pejorative fashion a number of occasions. Let me tell you a little story here. I wrote an article, which some of what I'm saying now comes from the article on Judaism and Islam, and it was published in a journal no longer exists called Judaism, which was a quasi-academic, but more pop between academic and popular. And I had a note there just explaining why the Rambam used certain negative terms about Muhammad. Another term he uses, by the way, is called them the pasul, the unfit one. That is a play, or fusul in Arabic, that's a play on Rasul. The Muslims refer to Muhammad as Rasul, like the apostle. And so the Rambam calls him the pasul. But it's not just, so I had a little note on this, and I saw the article in proof, everything was there. I get the journal, all of a sudden, that note is removed. I told the story in my book, Studies on Maimonides, so I called him, I said, what's going on here? And I couldn't believe it. This is supposedly somewhat of an academic. He said, didn't want the Muslims to, go crazy by seeing this, so therefore we took it out, without asking me. So in the introduction to my Studies on Maimonides, because I have something called a note on Maimonides, a note on Maimonides and Muhammad, I say that I don't want the Muslims to be offended. I'm not trying to insult their prophet or anything. I'm just trying to analyze. I don't want to be killed. I'm trying to analyze an point of intellectual history. Why Salman Rushdie? Why this is the case? And I do, and I explain it. And it's also worthy of note because it isn't just look at the medieval period. You had many apostates from Judaism to Islam. They could read the writings, and Jews wrote Judeo-Arabic. That's Arabic in Hebrew characters. And yet we find not just the Rambam, but other medieval writers, even in Yemen, where they refer to the Meshuggah, they refer to the Pasul. Now, if you go today...
They were not afraid?
That's interesting thing. You go to Pakistan today, and you'd say this,
They kill you.
You go to even more moderate countries like Morocco, you probably put in jail or something. And yet in the medieval period, we have numerous references this way, and it's as if they didn't... Rambam does say, be careful not to read it out loud, but still, he wrote it, and it was published. It's as if they weren't afraid. Maybe the idea was that the Muslims, if you said that in the public square, you'd be executed. But the idea in their own writings, I don't know how else to explain it. But
when did he write it? When he was in Egypt, or because when he was in Andalusia, it was
he wrote
very
it.
modern, no?
No. These are all after he's left there. So that's, I think, interesting that in the medieval period, which is supposed to be so backwards and so dangerous in these matters, we have references, not just the Rambam, lots of others. It could be it's more dangerous today.
In Christian countries, they also, there is China.
No, there's no, in the Christian country, there's no problem referring to Muhammad, and in the Muslim countries, no problem.
Jesus.
No, then you couldn't write. You had to write in, they were censored. You had to write in code.
Islam, the
and things like this.
Muslims have this concept of desecrating the host in medieval period.
No, not that, but it's still, you can't criticize the prophet. There were some. You're right. There are in the Christian world also. You had told us Yeshu and things, but they were very careful. They would not. But you do have some examples as well. Obviously, they thought that manuscripts could be kept hidden, and but the difference is that the Rambam does this not just in a manuscript, but like an open letter, which he sends to the. So it could be the same. The Rambam hints though to Muhammad. He doesn't always speak explicitly. He hints to him. So, for example, in the Guide of the Perplexed, in Book 2, Chapter 40, he lists the signs of the true prophet. And one of the signs are you renounce bodily pleasures. Anyone reading this would know that Muhammad, with all his wives and everything, that bodily pleasures is not something that he renounced. So that could be seen clearly as a hint to that. In fact, that's the passage in 240 where the Rambam says, true prophet renounces bodily pleasures because the sense of touch is a disgrace to us, as Aristotle has stated. And in the Ageris Kodesh, falsely attributed to the Ramban, he says that has a taint, a shemetz of kafira. Because if God gave us the sense of touch, how can the Rambam say that? But this is the famous passage. Yaakov Emden goes to town on this. A lot of people don't like this, but that's the passage where he says it. Now, in Guide 236, the Rambam says, A true prophet will not have the desire for the pleasures of eating, drinking, and sexual intercourse. Now, this also clearly alludes to Muhammad, and you don't need me to tell you this. If you look on the spot in Abarbanel's Perush there and Shem Tov's Perush, they state explicitly. And finally, the Rambam says in Guide 232, he says that you will find certain sources which it seems that God will turn anyone into a prophet that he wills, but only if someone is perfect. That is, you can't be a prophet if you're not perfect in all the ways that the Rambam sets out. But for an ignorant person to become a prophet, or one of the common people, he says, this is impossible, according to us,
He never mentions the name Muhammad.
except as if he would turn an ass or a frog into a prophet. He says that it can't happen to us except if you say he could do that. Now,
Excuse me, can you elaborate on that? Because, how can the Rambam say that the Nevi'im never mention a schar v'oinish related to physical pleasures, or not pleasures, but physical needs at least?
no, it's not that. It's that they don't have the desires for it.
They themselves.
They themselves don't have the desires for it. Now, what does it mean if you say that he
the
can...
Rambam never mentions Muhammad by name.
No.
And does she mention Islam? Those words?
Emunah Yishmaelim, yeah.
Emunah
Yishmaelim, yeah. He says that an ignorant person could become a prophet is like us that thinking that God could turn a frog or an ass into a prophet. Now,
that is against a very basic tenet of Islam, which says that Muhammad was illiterate.
okay, so you're stealing my thunder, exactly. But that's very good. Okay, so what's your name? Shaya. What Shaya points out is that Muslims believe that Muhammad was illiterate, and that's the greatest proof for the truth of the Quran, because it shows that it's the most beautiful Arabic, and he couldn't have written it because he was illiterate, so therefore it must be from God. And the Rambam is saying, by definition, an ignorant person can't have this. That's why it's such a heresy if to say that Muhammad was occupied by a jinn, like this spirit, because then the spirit would explain, jinns were thought to be able to come into you and create great poetry. That would mean that it came from the jinn. Now, if you look in the commentary of Fodi's commentary on that passage, by the way, Fodi, he's a standard commentary on the Moreh Nevuchim. We know that he became a Muhammad also later on.
Really?
Yes, Fodi, 100%. Yes,
When did that happen?
that happened in Spain.
He was a true philosopher.
Yeah, but his parish is like Rashi on the Moreh Nevuchim. He wrote the parish before he became it.
He's
Became Christian.
He's the one who the Yavitz writes Echad Rasha. He writes Arba Barim on the Perush.
No, the Rosh is Narboni. Does he mention
And
Fodi? I don't
the
know.
Stam.
Kreskas is the simpleton. So Fodi says that when it says turn a donkey into a prophet, obviously it's referring to Bilam's ass. And he says, and the frog refers to the fish that swallowed Yonah, to whom God spoke. And the point is, just like the Rambam says that the story of Bilam's ass only took place in a dream, according to Fodi, the whole story of Yonah only took place in a dream. But had the Rambam written fish, not frog, his point would be well taken. But I think Rav Mazuz has it correct, that the key to understanding what he's talking about here is what he says earlier in the chapter. Quote, it's not possible that an ignoramus should turn into a prophet, nor that a man could be a prophet on a certain evening and be a prophet the following month, as though he had made some fine. Nor can he not be a prophet one day and then be a prophet the next day. So Ramazuz says that this is an allusion to Muhammad. Remember, he was illiterate, like Shaya says, until Gabriel appears to him and says, recite. And that's what turned him into a prophet. So the Ramazuz says this is the sort of prophet that the Rambam refers to as an ass or a frog. In fact, the Rambam in his Perush Mishnah, the introduction to the 13 principles, in the 7th principle, gives 4 characteristics of Nevi'im, and at least 3 of them are directed against Muhammad, I believe. 1, what does he say? That Moshe Rabbeinu received his prophecy directly from God, not through an intermediary. And yet in Islam, no one can receive a prophecy from God. It's through the angel, Gabriel. So therefore it can't be true. 2, what does he say? Moshe is awake during the revelations. And yet according to Islam, Muhammad received the revelations when he was in a dream or vision. And 3, Moshe Rabbeinu could get the prophecies whenever he wished. And with Muhammad, he never chose the time. He didn't know. I mean, it just came. So the fact that the Rambam chooses to stress those three, and the fourth one, I don't think so, I'm forgetting the fourth one what it is, but at least those three could clearly be directed against Muhammad. So even if you wanted to say that Muhammad was a prophet, he clearly was not at the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore we can ignore what he tells us to change the Torah because he doesn't have the authority. And by the way, while almost all Jewish scholars refer negatively to Muhammad, there's an exception or two. You even mentioned this in my new book on Rav Kook. There's a Rav Netanel ben Al-Fayumi. He's the father, by the way, of Rav Yaakov Fayumi, whom the Rambam sent the letter to Yemen that we're going to get to. He states that God inspires, every nation gets their prophet for them, and that Muhammad was inspired by God with legislation suited for that people. So he has this. Now, Rav Kafech, who published Rav Netanel stuff, says that he only said it for Muslim eyes. He couldn't have really meant it. But I don't know. We believe that they're prophets to the non-Jewish nations. So why couldn't Muhammad be a prophet to give them morality things? I mean, it's not. The fact is, Rav Kook basically says the same thing. He didn't know Rav Netanel, and if you look in his Livuchei Ador in the note there, they point out that this is really parallel to the Ganas Chalim of Netanel Fayumi. Now, the Rambam further explains his view about Islam in a letter he wrote to a certain Ovadia the convert. Now, it's interesting. In the medieval period, when you converted, it was a popular thing to take the name Ovadia. That's because the Agada that Ovadia was an Edomite convert. As far as I know, in the last few hundred years, no converts ever taken the name Ovadia. I don't know what they take, Avraham, whatever, but the Ovadia, but we know that was done, and we know of even three medieval Ovadias. The famous Ovadia, the Norman proselyte, there's another Ovadia, and then this Ovadia who's a Muslim, not a Christian. So Ovadia had previously been a Muslim, so he knew what Islam was all about, and he's studying with this Rebbe who's teaching him, and the Rebbe declares that, Islam is idolatry, and Ovadia says it's not idolatry, and the Rebbe doesn't accept it, and the Rebbe ridiculed him. The Rebbe said they have this ceremony where they throw the stones on the pilgrimage, and that's like worship of Mercurius, the form of Avodah Zarah. Now, what is this throwing of stones? The pilgrims, they collect these stones, 49, I believe, when they go to Mecca, and I saw online on Wikipedia that they used to throw it at poles, but people would be hit on opposite sides, so now they have walls there. And why do they throw the stones? They throw the stones because they have a tradition when Abraham was going to sacrifice his son. And by the way, it does not say in the Quran which son it is. The standard Muslim view is Ishmael, but there are medieval Muslim interpreters who say it's Yitzchak. Demons tried to tempt him, and he picked up these stones and threw it at them, and the demons ran away, and therefore they commemorate that. By the way, the Rambam says, and I think in this letter, he says that they throw stones to confuse the Satan. Confuse the Satan. That's not. I assume he means the same sort of thing, but that's not exactly what. If you ask him what they'll say it is. Now, if you know your Agadatas, this will ring a bell for you, because we have stories how Avram's going to sacrifice Yitzchak, and the Satan puts all sorts of problems in his path, and much in Islam comes from our sources. You have the Quran, and you have what's called the Hadith. That's the traditions about Muhammad's life. In fact, the Quran even has the story of Avraham breaking his father's idols, which I know people sometimes think it's actually in there somewhere in Bereshit, but it's not there. Take my word for it. And Abraham Geiger, the early Reform leader, his doctoral dissertation, which you can get online in English, they translate English, is titled, "What Did Muhammad Take from the Jews?" And it's all these things in the Quran, the Hadith literature we see that comes from Jewish tradition. And furthermore, there was another person who wrote about this. His name was Abraham Katsch. He spelled his name Katschh. His father, you know his father, Nyberger? Okay. His father was Rav Reuven Katz, the Degel Reuven of Petach Tikva, who we spell the name Katz. But he was rabbi in Bayonne, New Jersey, for a number of years before he went to Eretz Yisrael.
That's his essay?
Yeah.
He printed in Eichenstein's Sefer Zikaron?
It must be, yeah. But I mean, that's from his book. He wrote a book. I believe so. I can't remember I know the Bracha Menachem, I think it's called, or something. Yes. But I think it must be him in that. Although I don't know, maybe other people have written about it also. But I think it's probably him. So he stayed in America, or he went back to Israel and came back. By the way, he had two other brothers. He had a brother who was a Rosh Yeshiva YU, Rabbi Michael Katz, and then the rabbi in Passaic, Leon Katz, Label Katz. But so he also wrote an entire book about this. Okay, so the Rambam writes to Ovadia. First of all, the Rambam is very upset with his teacher. You know, a Rebbe is supposed to learn from his students, and not. Sometimes the students know more than a Rebbe. And this teacher did not behave appropriately. And he says to him, the Ishmaelim, which they mean, obviously, look, in the Muslim world today, most Muslims are not Arab. You know what the largest country is of Arab Muslims? Indonesia, exactly. And they're not Arabs, and Turkey's not Arab, Iran's not Arab, and there's more Muslims probably in, certainly in India, there's, 100, 110 million, even maybe in China there might be more than most Arab countries. But they call them Yishmaelim. And he says they're not at all of the Avodah Zarah has long been severed from them. And even if they say false things about us, remember, we alter the text of the Torah, we can't say false things about them, and etc. And by the way, the Rambam repeats this view about Islam throughout the commentary in the Mishnah Torah, the Chuvos, that it's a pure monotheism, it's not Avodah Zarah. Also important to understand the Rambam's view of Islam is a well-known letter he wrote around the year 1165. At this time, he was living in Fez, I believe. Now, why was he in Fez? He had not yet traveled to Eretz Yisrael. And it was addressed to those Jews in Morocco who, in a departure from traditional Islamic tolerance, traditionally, when it came to so-called people of the book, Jews and Christians, later, by the way, Hindus were into this, they were not given the choice conversion or death. They were told that they could live as a second-class citizen, the dhimmi status, etc. But there was this radical Islamic movement in North Africa. I think maybe Hamas. Although I don't know what Hamas's view on this would be. Hamas apparently would be very happy to have like Maturey Carter living there. I don't think they'd force them to give up their Judaism. But the Almohads had this conception. The Almohads believed that conversion or death. And how they interpret this passage? It's in the Quran, that no compulsion in religion. Some say that it means no compulsion in religion, that God doesn't compel, but we do compel. There's other different ways to interpret it. So they took over North Africa, and then they moved into Spain. Now, many Jews in Spain and Morocco chose to follow Judaism secretly while outwardly acting as a Muslim. Basically do the same thing that would happen a couple hundred years later in Spain. And some have argued that the Rambam must also have done so. This became a big debate in the 19th century, and I don't know how you're going to solve this one way or another. The Rambam was accused by a Muslim in Egypt that when he was in Morocco, he did live as a Muslim. But look, at the end of the day, it's not a theological
secret Muslim. Still a Muslim.
No, but say he had converted in Morocco. Now, look, it's not a theological issue or a question of the Rambam's status, because we'll see what the Rambam says. When faced with a situation like that, his advice is to outwardly convert. But you could see how it could be a problem for certain people that the Rambam... Now, the Rambam says, according to one version of the letter, the counsel I give, not just to everyone else, but even to myself, is to leave here as soon as we can. That would imply that he was living like this. But another version of the letter, it's just the advice I give to everyone else. It's hard to see how he could be in the middle of Morocco and Fez, in the Almohad area, where he wasn't outwardly living as a Muslim. Be that as it may, the Rambam said, when faced with a situation like this, you don't need to martyr yourself. You can pretend to be a Muslim. Now, it so happened that there was a scholar outside the Almohad lands who issued a ruling that given this choice, convert to Islam or die, you must accept death. And if not, you are a real apostate. Now, this is the same ruling that was given already and will be given in the future to Jews living in the Christian world during the Crusades and then during the Spanish, etc. And now it's being stated with regard to Islam. And it's in response to this letter, that this attack on the Jews of Morocco who had converted, that the Rambam writes his famous Igeret HaShema. By the way, he doesn't begin it by saying, you asked me the question. Many people have the assumption he was asked. They turned to him, even though he was a young rabbi. But it could just be that he, on his own, decided to, and this was an issue that his father, Maimon, had been concerned with also. And it could be he just wrote this letter on his own. And Well, let me say first that it's a marvelous defense of a Jewish community forced to hide its religion because of persecution. Now, the Rambam he thinks that this rabbi is an idiot, he degrades him, but he couldn't have been an idiot, because if he was a nobody, then the community wouldn't have been thrown into a quandary. The fact is that they were thrown into a quandary because of his ruling. And his ruling was that they rejected the Torah. He also thought apparently that there was some real Avodah Zarah, mercurious things. But in any event, the rejection of the Torah, and it's not just this person. Chaim Soloveitchik has a famous article in which he basically says that this rabbi is right. That, of course, denial of the Torah is the same thing, it has the same status as Avodah Zarah. And therefore, Chaim Soloveitchik in this article sees the Rambam's letter as a letter of rhetoric, not really halacha, just trying to deal with a community that's made the wrong choice, but trying to keep them in the fold, that sort of thing. It's a big debate between him and David Hartman and others, yeah.
We don't have the name of this.
No, we don't know who it is. Now, the Rambam says in this letter that first you have to leave as soon as you can, because obviously you can't stay in a place where you can't worship openly. But as long as you're here, simply reciting the Shada, to say there's no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet, that doesn't mean you don't give up your life for that. And also, you can go to the mosque. The mosque is a place where they're worshiping God, and you worship God there. There's no Avodah Zarah there. You go there, and when you leave, you leave. But until you leave, to save your life, it's Pikuach Nefesh. That's the ruling. That's okay, and you're allowed to lie to save your life. Catholics and Kantians, they say you can't lie. We say you can. So obviously, here we see a big difference between the Jewish response to Christianity and Islam when it faces persecution. But it's interesting that in this letter on martyrdom, the Rambam says, but if you want to be pious and holy and martyr yourself, you're a holy person. And also, he doesn't really discuss the status of Islam in the letter, but you can infer from it. That's because he says there's no action of Avodah Zarah, etc. But he says you're holy if you decide to. In the Mishnah Torah, he doesn't say this. In the Mishnah Torah, if you commit suicide, if you allow yourself to be killed, you don't have to mischayef b'nafsho. So how to understand this? Rav Kafach says on it, the Rambam must have changed his mind. Rav Sheilat in his commentary, in his edition of the letters, quotes from Nachman Rabinovitz in his Yad Peshuta, who says, no, that's not it at all. The Rambam never changed his mind. It's sort of almost like a Chaim Soloveitchik argument that actually, no, not Chaim Soloveitchik. He says it's like an Avera Lishma with the Yael. That if someone were to ask me, the Rambam, of course you Yavar Vehari, but once you already did it, then it's holy. It's like an Avera Lishma, like with Yael. If Yael were to come ask, should she do this, etc., we'd say no. But once you already did it, you're thought to be holy. So, and look, it was a real practical matter. The Dayan of Fez, his name was Yosef ibn Shushan, he was burnt at the stake because he refused to convert. So what's the Rambam supposed to say? Mischayef b'nafsho? These people are, the people had died for this. So by the way, another point.
What does it mean that it's only rhetoric?
It's rhetoric. It's not a halachic. Rhetoric, not in the sense of rhetoric, like we'll say mere rhetoric. It's a way of it's an argument.
That's also rhetoric.
No. He's saying it's the Mishnah Torah is speaking about if you're not obligated. If someone says, let's say, eat this tarfus, and I say, well, I can't eat tarfus, you kill me. But he say, here's an example where you're denying the whole Torah.
Mishnah Torah is not saying explicitly about
No, Mishnah Torah is not saying. Mishnah Torah is just saying. Mishnah Torah is just saying, in any time when you're not obligated, Mischayef b'nafsho. I wonder if Rav Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch, if he knew about the letter of martyrdom. Why? Because he seems to disagree with the Rambam. What does he say in Yeridea 1572? Listen to this. Asur Adam Lamar Shehu Goy, Kadesh Lo Yargu. It's forbidden for a person to say he's a goy so that they don't kill him. Aval im Kadesh Lo Yakiru Shel Yehudi Mishanim Avusho. But if you want to put on different clothing, like the clothing that the non-Jews wear, the Shas Gezerah Mutar Kevan She'ena Omer Shehu Goy. I didn't put it in the text. Shulchan Aruch says you can't say you're a goy. And this came up during the Holocaust.
But maybe he's talking about Christian, not Muslim.
He says goy. He doesn't say. If you look in the Vilna edition, if you look in the Vilna edition, it says Ovei Kochavim. But if you look in the real version, it's goy. And this came up during the Holocaust because Rav Ashri speaks about it. You get a passport that says RC Roman Catholic. So he said you could. Why? Because RC they think it means Roman Catholic, but I think it means something else. So it's equivocal language. But I mean, can you think about this? Every single Jew who survived the Holocaust, basically, or many of them, I'm not talking about the ones who went into the churches or kids who were raised Christian, but generally, you'd say, of course I'm an Aryan, I'm not Jewish, Wouldn't everyone say that? Could it really be the case that to save your life, if someone says, are you a Jew? You say, no, I'm a Goy. To save your life, that we have to martyr ourselves? No one did that in the Holocaust, and I dare say throughout history, no one does it. What?
It wasn't a religious persecution.
Okay, so that's an interesting point.
Ethnic, yes.
That was an ethnic. That point has been made not only with regard to that matter, but also the reverse. That we talking about Kadoshim. Kadoshim is the one who dies al Kiddush Hashem but could save himself. This is a new type of Kadosh where you had no choice. It didn't matter. It wasn't a religious element. But still, the Shulchan Aruch just says, Asar lo adam lomar shu goy kadesh lo yargu. So you're going to say, okay, he means in a situation where you have a choice to save yourself by saying. In the Holocaust, you couldn't save yourself by saying you're not Jewish. In other words, it wasn't a ticket to... It could be, yeah. And that's what I thought. I wrote it even here. Perhaps just reciting the Shahada and going to the mosque is akin to changing your clothes, not saying that you're a non-Jew. Well, okay. Now, I've just told you about the Rambam's attitude towards Islam shows his honesty, because he hated Islam. But when he was asked to give the halacha, the proper halacha, he had to give it, at least the halacha that he saw as proper. I say he hated Islam because he has another letter, his letter to Yemen. The letter to Yemen, where the Jews are being subjected to forced apostasy, there was a false messiah, there are all sorts of problems there. And he says in this letter that the persecution of the Muslims, Ishmael, is worse than any persecution that Jews, and they hate the Jews more than any other people. Now, the fact is, this is not true in the time leading up to the Rambam. It's not true the time after the Rambam. It's, even though he suffered, and that was unusual, the circumstances he was in with the Almohad persecution, generally that hasn't been the case. Well, Jews were more persecuted in the Christian world. I mean, the Christians had a problem with the Jews that the Muslims didn't have, a theological problem, deicide. We killed their God. So, the pogroms and the blood libels and the desecration of the host and all these things, that happened in the Christian world. And generally, the Muslim world, the expulsions, the Muslims are very happy to have the Jews come to them. What did it mean to live as a Muslim? It meant living as a second-class citizen. No one wants to live as a second-class citizen today. And sometimes, don't think this was easy. Sometimes it was easier than others, but in many times it was very strict. Morocco, actually, it was very strict. Jews, there was many examples of Jewish women being kidnapped, and Jews couldn't wear shoes once they left the ghetto, the Mela, and it was no picnic. However,
Jews... In Rambam's Egypt, you were not allowed to ride a horse.
Yes, all these things. But... compared to the way it was in the Christian world, Christian world had, not that it was always bad in the Christian world, of course not. I was in Provence last summer. We spoke a lot about the Meiri. I mean, Meiri is the one who speaks about, the nations bound by civilized behavior. We have many places in Europe where Jews live very well, but if you look at the long view of things, the Christian world was a much harder place to live. Jews could run their own societies. They were protected. Second-class citizens. They couldn't ride horses. They couldn't build new synagogues. They had to pay special taxes. All sorts of ways to degrade them, to try to push them to become Muslim. But yet the Rambam says that. That's his experience. So let me mention a few of the halachic matters that Poskim and others have dealt with in recent years. Just, I do this talk sometimes at shul, so I always say, all practical halachic matters, you have the Marad Asra. But okay. So, entering a mosque, when I go on my trips, I don't take people into churches. I don't go to churches, although there is a heter from a great Rav in England, if it's mostly a tourist spot, but generally we don't go, although interestingly enough, you have in Spain, you have churches that were taken from synagogues. So my shop, I asked Rabbi Yehuda Tzlahenkin about this. If they took our shul, they confiscated it, and then they set up a church there. Why can't we go in? It's ours. And he thought it was a good svara, but he didn't want to poskin. But subsequently, I heard from someone who brought it to her. He asked a big posek. I don't want to say it online because May doesn't want it, but I'll tell you afterwards. Who thought that it's okay to go with them? And I told this guy, because they call me for questions. This is Segovia. I said the group won't go, even though you got a psak. And lo and behold, the group from Israel, they did. They went in. because he shared with them the psak that just because it's as if someone move into your house and set up a statue there, now you're not allowed to go in your house. It's your house. They have no right to your house. But in any event, what about a mosque? Well, once it's not a Avodah Zarah, you'd assume that there isn't any problem. Now, none of the early poskim discussed this matter, but the prevailing opinion of more recent authorities, I'll give you a couple of different examples in opposition, but the prevailing view, if I'd say it, is that there is no problem, because after all, a mosque is just a room where non-Jews pray to God in a kosher fashion. And in fact, I dare say that a number of you, well, I don't know actually, if I was staying in a group of modern Orthodox, or maybe, I don't know, your background's all, well, certainly some of you have been in a mosque. Right? Do you know Maras Machpelah? Maras Machpelah, the section where Yitzchak is buried, is a mosque, and before Baruch Goldstein, practicing active mosque, before Baruch Goldstein's incident, it was open every day. Now it's only open a couple of times a year.
Said,
excuse me.
Okay, we'll get to. I mention him in a second, but the section of Yitzchak is definitely in a mosque. Rav Yitzchak Inspector has an interesting tshuva. Rav Yitzchak Inspector, when I was growing up in my circles, we said he's the Gadol Hador. Yitzchak Inspector.
because of the yeshiva.
Well, we knew REITs, Yeshivas University, rabbinical school. No, just because he was, the Gadol Hador of. So, but then I got a little older and I realized, hey, there are Sephardic Jews also, and they have the Ben Ish Chai, they have others, Chaim Palachi, the Yitzchak Chana. Okay, so then I was thinking, he's the Gadol Hador of the Ashkenazi. But then, then I learned about Hasidim. What are the Hasidim? No, Yitzchak Chana, they have their own. And okay, so in the end, he's the Gadol Hador of the Litvish. And my yeshivas, they told us that this is where the Torah is in Lita. But I'm broader than that, so I'll just say he's the Gadol Hador just for the Litvaks. But still, great figure. He's asked the following question. This question, I found the city. It's a Turkish city of Kars. You can find it. The Christians and Muslims were fighting, and the Muslims were pushed out, and they weren't coming back anytime soon. So the question to Yitzchak Hanan is, could the Christians wanted to give the mosque to the Jews to turn it into a shul? Now, you know that at least standard halacha is that we do take a church, but we turn it into a shul, but it has to be a bittul. Do them selling it or something, but if it was reversed and the Christians just chased away, there was no bittul of Avodah Zarah, then we couldn't adopt it. However, the Muslims, they also just ran away. But since he quotes the sources I mentioned, the Rambam, since the Shulchan Aruch especially, Yeridea says, if the Ovdei Avodah Zarah left their Avodah Zarah in a war, it's not batul, unless they were able to come back, and they didn't come back, then it is batul. But here's a case where they couldn't come back, so if it was a church, we couldn't take it. But it's a mosque. A mosque is just a place where non-Jews pray in a kosher fashion. So Yitzchak Hanan says, yes, you can take it, turn it into a shul. And presumably that's what they did. Rav Avad Yosef rules that you can daven in a mosque. Only mincha? Now, by the way, there always was tefillos in the Maras Machpelah, which second of Yitzchak and Gedolim, with Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. They just know Amona. He davened there as well. Now, why would you ever want to daven in a mosque? Incidentally, I tell you that my kids' school, before October 7th, we're almost done with it, before October 7th, my kids' school had a Jewish-Muslim exchange, which after October 7th is too hard because, that you can't agree on, just like the Rambam says, we can't agree on basic things in the text of the Torah, we can't agree on basic things. Even if they'll condemn October 7th and say it was a terrible thing, you have to know the context, etc. But the Muslim day school would come to our kids' school, and we would go there, and they go in the shul, we go in the mosque, and that's how in my trip to Morocco, in Casablanca, a huge mosque there, we go in there, and so does Yeshiva University. We were there at the same time that they had a group there, and but you say, when would you ever want to daven? Well, it could be in an airport. You can imagine this, by the way. As far as I know, there's only one airport in Europe that has a shul. Anyone know which one airport?
Frankfurt.
Exactly, Frankfurt. So Heathrow has a mosque, but it's really down. I went there. I thought maybe I'd daven there. Vadia said you can, because it's a little weird, maybe, especially today, to where it's filling out. Who knows? But I felt too weird when I got there. But maybe you could. And in fact, I saw online, I looked into it, two different reports. One person spoke about davening in a mosque, and he said Muslims came in when he's davening. He thought it would be a problem, and it wasn't anything. They said, okay, finish up. But then I saw another report where he said they came in and they had looks. He thought it was a problem. But I don't think that's necessarily anti-Semitism. If I came into the Frankfurt shul and I saw them davening on the floor, the Muslims, I might think, wait a second, this is our place. So I don't know. Now, Rabbi Berger mentioned, one of you mentioned the Koisenberger in the Divrei Yatziv, and also the Tzitz Eliezer. They are going into a mosque because they say that the Muslims have a status of idolaters since they reject the Torah. They're Goyim and they reject the Torah, and they cite the Ran. This is what the Ran says. Now, I say the Ran, although just to anticipate, it's almost certain it's not the Ran. It's another Rishon, I guess that's important, but it's not Nissim Garona. First of all, he contradicts himself. Second of all, in the Peirush on Sanhedrin, it cites the Ran, so it can't be him speaking, but he says as follows. He says, the Meshuga of Ishmaelim, Afal Pisha ain't towing Achareim Lasosan Alos, even though they don't turn Muhammad into a god, they bow to him, they do a bow of Elohus. Din avodas elilim yesh lahen. It's referring not also to the Christian things. L'chol davar yisur shel avodas elilim shelo behidro avad hem yishtachlim. They're not just bowing to show respect. She'ein hidro lamesim elkin avodas shalos he avodasan. The so-called Ran says here that they bow a bow of Elohus, even though they don't think Muhammad is a god. This is how people bow to a god, and they're bowing to Muhammad this way, so it's Avodah Zarah. Well, what can I tell you? Fact is that the Muslims are not bowing to Muhammad. Here's another example what we saw from the Yad Yehuda. No Muslim would ever say they're bowing to Muhammad. They're bowing to God. So when you start with a false assumption, which the Divrei Yatziv and the Tzitz Eliezer accept, how can you trust the tshuva to be accurate? No Muslim is bowing to Muhammad. They say they're bowing to Muhammad, even though they think Muhammad's God, but they're bowing to Muhammad with a Elohus type of bow. But they're not bowing to Muhammad. So, but not
we do on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur.
Exactly. But the Ran is not the only one to say this. I found in Tosas HaSholim, if you look in Tosas HaSholim to Parshas Vayera at the beginning, you all know the story of the Malachim, right? They come to Avraham, and he says to them, wash their feet. So the Tosas Tosas al-Torah, cites the Maimar Chazal, it's in Rashi, that they wash their feet to remove, what do they have to remove? Anyone remember? The avak, because they bow to the dust, I guess some sort of Avodah Zarah. Tosas there states that the gematria of avak is Mahmut, Mem Chet Mem Vav Tet. Now Muhammad is never spelled that way. It's spelled with a tet, but without the vav. But okay, but he says, so you're right, it's before him, of course. But the Tosfos says that this is Eloah Shel HaYishmaelim. This is the God of the Ishmaelim. So in Europe, Tosfos, they had no idea what the Muslims believed, and there was a common Christian idea that they worshipped him as a god. But it's not true. By the way, we're coming up to the high holidays, so you say this a few times a lot. You should know if you have any chazonim here. It's the most mispronounced word in the Hebrew language. A lot of people say Eloha. First of all, it's Mila El, and it's what we call the Patach Kanuva. It's either Eloah or Eloah. But the problem is also in Hallel, because we say it at least out loud. You sing it. So you can hear. So if you know the Chazan who gets it wrong, you got to do him a chesed by pointing him out. That
the story with the Divrei Yatziv is...
Yeah.
Hey, wait. You want to say a story?
No.
You want to say a story? Take the mic.
Okay.
Rabbi Berger, thank you.
Eloah.
Put it on.
Or Eloah.
Put it on.
Eloah or Eloah. The Masoretes diverge on whether it's either with an aleph or a W sound. Either Eloah or Eloah. It's no different than either one.
There was a fire on Harabayis.
Yeah.
The Klosenberg Rav said you should say Baruch Shulchan the Zoram.
Yeah.
So people asked him why. So on that came this response that it is Avodah Zarah. That was the story.
Yeah. So, but now, yeah.
The fact that a mask doesn't have an altar.
Pass around the mic because we can't hear people. Give him the mic. Like ask louder. We're open for questions. No.
The fact that a mask doesn't have an altar or any religious symbol in there, is that not mentioned by any as to?
Well, wait till we see. We'll see in a minute. But no, they don't. Yes, because look, it's clear. There's no anyone knows about it. Assume it's just a room where they do this. But there was.
This is not mentioned as a.
No, they don't mention it because you don't need to have an altar if you believe in multiple gods, and you don't need an altar. It's.
It looks like a lot of people have what to say. Let's go.
I can't find the source, but definitely remember who said it to me. Jesus, not a lot. But somebody once listened to somebody a lecture explaining Tzidkon being this great Gudel B'Yisrael, however, not knowing a lot of things. So he gave, I remember, a few examples. One example was the he speaks about a specific river and he calls it Mayan Jaina himself, and he didn't really understand geography. The other example, he says that when he asks on that Tosfos, and he says, how could Tosfos say that this is Avodah Zura when the Rambam says that it's not? And the guy was trying to explain that he doesn't understand that sense of history, that in antiquity, Islam.
Okay.
So I remember them specifically saying that it showed that in his, I don't know where the words are, that it was like lacking that historical knowledge, understand that Islam is like a newer thing.
Rav Yitzhak Elchanan is the first one, Gadol, Lithuanian Gadol, that has a court. All of his information was funneled to him by a person named Yaakov Lifshitz. And by the way, there was a rabbi, I think Rabbi Berger maybe is Moti. They call you Moti. What do they call you? Okay, he might be the only one who's ever heard of him here. His name was Shemaria Menashe Adler. What a character he was. He actually cites. He thought that all the mosques have to be destroyed in Eretz Yisrael, etc. Okay. Now, in discussions about the halachic status of a mosque, everyone cites a tshuva of Rav Eliezer Fried. I included this in the package. Exactly, the son of Yitzhak Volozhin, and successor. He was Rav of Volozhin, Rosh Hashiva. But I tell you now something that no one has ever said before. He is not speaking about Islam. He is speaking about Christianity. He's speaking in code. Although he's asked the question about the Beis Tefillah Ishmaelim, and if you read this tshuva, it's obvious it's in code. First of all, Rav Eliezer Fried, why would anyone be asking him a question about a mosque? But he speaks about, like in the next page, the first page, he says, go to the first page, it means mosque. He says, "Lefize bizmanenu shma midim hapesel o demus halavana shalhem bebeis tefillah mamash havim." You know, he speaks about putting the statue, or he says demus halavana. Yeah, first of all, demus halavana is not; it's just a symbol they use. This is an example. Take a look at this on your own. We don't have the time. He is clearly referring to churches. But it's no different than when the Minchas Elazar or others speak about in India, you know, putting the candles in your window like they do in India on the holidays. They're speaking about Christians. He's not speaking about this. I'll give you another example of this. Everyone cites this. All the tshuvas cite this as talking about a mosque. He's clearly referring to, again, just think about it. What European city is asking him about a mosque? But it's not. And he knows, in the 19th century, he knows that they don't have a pesel in the an idol in the mosque.
He says, "Give me the kippah." Kippah refers to a mosque, no?
No, but it's just that
he's the opposite. He says,
I think this is one of these things when the tshuva says, it speaks about the people in India, when everyone know, or the first page when it says, anytime I mention Akum, it doesn't mean the ones we live among, and ones the barbarians out there. I think everyone understood this.
Was there any mosques in Lita at that time? There sure must have been.
Was there any mosque in Lita? I asked. It turns out there was one or two. But still, that's not, I don't believe it. I found in the Tshuva Me'ava, volume 3, I have it here. He has a correspondence with Baruch Yaitelas. Baruch Yaitelas was a Rosh Hashiva and a Maskil. You can visit Kever. Kever is not far from the Noda Yehuda. And it's the same sort of thing. He's asked a question about Jews in Turkey and the fact that they're selling candles that the Muslims use, and they put it in front of the Elil. It's obvious he's referring to Christians. And finally, the last example here, I just printed this out today. I thought I'd bring a few more examples. The Chachmas Adam. Chachmas Adam, the Shivava is here. It's not Chachmas Adam, Siman Kuf Mem Vav. This is how he cites it, and he goes and mentions it again later. Din laharchik mi kabbalas atstaka. Who you shouldn't take v'shalo kabbalat staka min Yishmaelim. You shouldn't get staka from Yishmaelim. And he says Melch Yishmael Osar sheshalacho mamon Yisrael atstaka mikablin mishum shalom malchus. In other words, even so he's not talking about a Muslim king sending money to Vilna. That's how they would use it. By the way, strangely, the Rogatchover says that when the Rambam writes that it's not idolatry in the Mishnah Torah and the Maimar Kiddush Hashem, this is what the Rogatchover says. The Rambam wrote this because of fear of the government. It's amazing the Rogachover says this. And he says, it has to be because in Baba Metzia, it says that the Arabs bowed to the dust of their feet. So we see there of the Avodah Zarah. Now, the fact that Arabs, Muslims, Islam is much later, he also cites Tainus that says Kedar, is the son of Yishmaelim, and they worship the water. So what does that have to do with anything? Islam is a pretty new religion, but that's what the Rogachover says. So that itself is strange enough. But more strange is the fact that he says that the Rambam writes this out of fear of the government.
He's not afraid to call him Meshuggah.
I get it, but it's okay. Now I want to show you something. No, he didn't. I mean, what does he know? The Rogachover just knows anything he knows from Sfarim. He only knows Sfarim.
He only knows.
Sfarim, what appears in Sfarim.
So it appears in the
Russia,
Sfarim.
from White Russia. Where's
Yeah, the Rogachover. I don't know. He thinks he hasn't.
Where does it say?
New stuff they published from
Latvia.
New stuff. In fact, I first saw this quoted. I said, I can't believe it, but it's real. It's true. I can send you the source. Yes. It's even mentioned in Baruchov's biography of him.
It came out, whatever?
It's been out like 5-6 years, but it's so it's
He did it now.
Yeah. We have a sefer. This is going to blow you away from the Gonic period. It's called Sefer or Midrash Pitron Torah. Could be from Persia. Pitron Torah. Tough, yeah. This is in the page I handed out. Okay. And they redid it recently. A Haredi press redid it. It originally was published academically, Ephraim Orbach, and they're correct. Ephraim Orbach didn't have all the manuscripts, so there's some mistakes. So now we have a good Haredi press, including with a commentary, but wait till you see how the commentary reads it. But I want to show you something here. He's quoting on the pasuk. What's the pasuk? Oh, did I include the pasuk? Pasuk is in Dvarim. Levinyamin Amar. Binyamin, he said, we're going to see this soon. Yedid Hashem, the beloved of Hashem. Yishkon levetach alav. That is, the beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety by him. Chofef alav kol yom. He covers them all day. So the beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety all day. So look what he says. Uferush mishi yomar shadai yishkon levetach alav al zeh habayis shegavul nachas binyamin. This refers to the Harabayis that's in the Gvul of Binyamin. That is the Shechina, he's saying, is in the territory of Binyamin. Did you know that? The Yevus is in the Binyamin's, the territory of Binyamin. Even though it's conquered later by David, it was Binyamin. Even if parts of the city were in Yehuda, this is in Binyamin. And it says, Yavo b'ferish v'tzak yotam. Okay, skip that. Okay, now go down 4 lines. Shin gam hayom ein hashchina shriya bo. Even though today the Shekhinah is not found there, Am Yisrael golim himena goa, Am Yisrael has been exiled. V'heyos osa bayis beis avodahi biad kol yimashia bayis biado. So, and the Temple Mount can be controlled by anyone, whoever has it. What does it say? However, umakom ma'ua umuvchar umachubadhu shagam hayom hazeh osam ha'anoshim shabayis biyadam. It's very exalted because today the people who the Harabayis is in their hands. Asu oso beis avoda umufchar me'ula mechubad. They've made there. He's referring to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They've made there a wonderful place of worship. V'osa avoda kachamar and shenevad le'el echad shabar shamayim v'aretz v'chol habrios. And it's referring to this avoda that Moshe Rabbeinu says that the one God is worshipped there. L'chachamar. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu said kol hayom. All the time. Because even though Jews are not there anymore, the Muslims are there, and they're still worshiping God in the proper fashion. Ad biyas moret tzedek yomasi. Okay. But I want you now to look in the commentary on the left.
Is the last line.
Look in the, hold on, look in the left. Yeah, that when we're going to get it back. Okay. But look in the commentary. In the left-hand side, the fourth, the bottom, the large words. Shim gam hayom v'chulei. Klomar, afal pi shayom ein hashliya shruya bo, even though today the Shekhinah is not there, Vein Yisrael ovdino so sham, elogal misham, okay, then he goes, next one, Veyos osabais, Klomar, afal pi shagalo misham, adayin osabais, beis avodahi, biyad ka'uma shalosa sham. Now here's the crucial one, V'osa avoda kachamar. What did Moshe say? Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu said that it's going to be, the beloved of the Lord shall dwell safely in them all the day. Moshe, Shashchina, Tisha b'chalko shabinyam, umiyu, Moshe, lo niskavin was that. Moshe didn't intend by this nevuah that when the Jews are not there, it's okay because the Muslims will be there and they worship God. He thought when Moshe Rabbeinu gave his nevuah, his intention was that it would always be ruled by Jews. Aval garmu ha'avonos, v'na'asu beis avoda shel goyim. But because of our sins, it became a beis avoda shel goyim. She'ovdim es Hashem, they worship God. Mishum shegarma birkas Moshe al bayis hazeh shlo yisarei kamashos hashchina. V'afal pishu onis kayvim lezechas hashalim mikol makom hareyu kashkaga hayotzem mipnei hasholet shegam bisman hachorban yeh beis avodas Elohim. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't intend the Muslims, he intended the Jews, but our sins caused it otherwise. So even though he said it, it still took effect, the words, the literal words, because the Muslims were still worship God. But I ask you, etc. I ask you, is this what Pitron Torah means? That Moshe Rabbeinu, when he said that the Yishkon Lavetach permanently, that it would always be Kol Yisrael, but because Kol Yisrael later sinned, it's Shagaga from Moshe Rabbeinu, that therefore, but because this is so it's the Muslims, so at least they follow this, or does Muhammad really see a future where if it's not the Jews, it'll be the Muslims? I do not believe this is what...
Who was the beer?
The beer is, says I'm rabbi in Israel today. It's not a real beer, but I think this is a...
It's not the beer the same.
No, I think this is a distortion of the intention, I believe.
I think this is what the Rambam, they're holding it for us.
No, but the idea is that because of Moshe's bracha, you can't have a Avodah Zarah on Har HaBayis. Although there was a church. Do you know that when the Crusaders were in charge, they had a church there? Yeah.
He found a Avodah Zarah under the Mizbeach of the Yevisi.
Yeah. So do you agree with me that this is not what the Pitron Torah has in mind? Okay. Yeah, would you say, Rabbi Berger, before we end?
I think it's a very good idea. This person seems to be very well versed in Rambam.
Yeah.
And they're holding it for us. If we can't have it, let it at least not be a base of Avodah Zarah. Let it be a monotheistic religion that's the guardian
yes,
for
and
it.
and Moshe gave the prophecy is that, and therefore that's why it's them. But the question is this what Moshe meant? He says this is like a shagaga, or did Moshe? I think Pitron Torah is saying that his prophecy is that it'll always be.
He has a question, like the prophecy. So it's not Eskayim. Nevius Moshe Rabbeinu is not Eskayim. So obviously, also it's not a stira, it's not contradiction, because it is still a monotheistic presence there.
Okay, but the question is the intention?
No,
I don't know. Maybe he is right. I don't know. It just struck me as interesting.
Some medieval commentators believe that the actual structure is a remnant of the Beis Hamikdash.
No, some medieval commentators might believe that. Okay.
Who is the
But,
author?
we don't know who the author is.
It's from the Goynic period.
Yes, it's from the Goynic period.
Like
Yes.
8th century, 9th century?
Something like that, yeah. Maybe later, maybe 10th century. It's the Goynic period. Okay, let me finish up with a couple other things. You know, some of the people thought that you couldn't touch the western wall because they thought that was actually the wall of the Zara. But there's another example of where it's not a question, it's not a machokas. It's a fact. It's not. It's the wall for the retaining wall. There's no.
They know that, but medieval people didn't know that.
Not just medieval, modern people think that. I think the Brisker Rav, said you couldn't put anything in there, but it's not. We know it's not. Okay. According to, just some for final practical halacha, and then one idea which I'll leave you to think about. Look, according to the halacha, it's in the Mishnah, you can't sell land in Eretz Yisrael to a non-Jew. What's not clear, does this apply to all non-Jews or only to Ovdei Avodah Zarah? And some have stated over the years, this became a big deal during the Shemitah controversy, that Muslims are excluded from this prohibition because look, if the reason given, you find the reason given that you can't sell it to a guy because they're going to bring an Avodah Zarah to the land if they're not Ovdei Avodah Zarah, then it's not a problem.
Is it to sell to go get Toshav also?
No, not Gertoshav. So the question is he's a Gertoshav? That's the question. Is a Nosam a Gertoshav? Some hold that you can't have a Gertoshav today. So, but others say they do. They are Gertoshav. Now, this is the view of the. By the way, Gertoshav has to be someone though who's peaceful, etc. This is the basis of the chief rabbinate of Israel's view when they sell the land during the sabbatical year, and this goes back to Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. If it wasn't for Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, they needed his backing for this heter mechira, because although the other gedolim, including the Sephardic gedolim, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, he was the big one. They will sell it to a Muslim, a Bedouin, a Druze. They won't sell it to a Christian.
It's peaceful.
Because even if we say shituf, that it's permissible for them, it's not permissible for Jews in the land of Israel, so they won't. Now,
the fact that it's in the sect of a Zura doesn't say that it's of a Zura issue.
Well,
Well, the question, no, there
The
is.
fact that Chazal bring in Avodah Zarah doesn't show it's Avodah Zarah.
Well, I don't know, because the question is, if someone's usually the parallel is Ger Toshav Oved Avodah Zarah, but now we have a middle parallel, a middle ground, a monotheist. So he's a monotheist by definition of Ger Toshav, or if he can't actually go to the base, in other words, this didn't even exist in Chazal's time, this middle ground. Rav Kook actually, he uses the logic that the Muslims are not Ovdei Avodah Zarah to permit selling them land, since Lo Sachonim only applies to Ovdei Avodah Zarah, because the Bach explicitly states, disagrees with the Beit Yosef and says that since Muslims are not Ovdei Avodah Zarah, Lo Sachonim doesn't apply to them. But if you look in Rav David Cohen of Flatbush, it points out something interesting, that Rav Kook had the censored version of the Bach from the Vilna edition. In the uncensored version, the Bach agrees with the Beis Yosef that Lo Sachonim applies to any guy, as you can't sell land to any guy except a Ger Toshav. However, the censorship in the Vilna edition changed it. So here we have an interesting thing. A psak given by Rav Kook, which became very important, is based on a false reading. It's not the only time we've had things like this, and you can justify it other ways perhaps, but it's certainly not based on the Bach. You can maybe justify it for other poskim. We know there's a Sephardic poskim in the 18th century who had the same argument. But Rav Kook Dafka goes the Bach, who disagrees with the Beis Yosef. So the Beis Yosef says of the Avodah Zarah. So the Bach says, therefore we see that if it's not of Avodah Zarah, like Muslims, that not of Avodah Zarah, that would be Muslims, therefore you can sell it. But the truth is the Beis Yosef didn't have that. The Beis Yosef says Goyim, and the Bach had the original text, it's just the censored version. Now when I speak in shows, I end with the following point, which is just putting out there, you think about. It's possible that the rise of extremist Islam has had an effect on Jewish law. And here I'm repeating something stated by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. And what Rabbi Riskin says is that in the modern Orthodox world, that's the world I come from, the halachic authorities all accept the view of the Meiri. The Provençal, 13th century Provençal Gadol, I'm sure you all know this, that all the laws, the anti-Gentile laws in the Talmud, are only directed against the wicked pagans of old. The language he uses, She'enam Gedurim B'darchei Adat. We're not bound by civilized behavior. And he wrote this in the Christian world. So don't think that it was always terrible in the Christian world. That's what he writes. He doesn't seem to be saying that it's not Avodah Zarah. But what he's saying is that, at least how I see it, I think he's not saying it's not Avodah Zarah, but that's not an Oved Avodah Zarah. When Chazal spoke about an Oved Avodah Zarah, with all these things that applied to him, it meant a barbarian. A barbarian, that's what it meant. And in Chazal's day, the Oved Avodah Zarah, the idolaters were also barbarians. In other words, the Christianity could still be Avodah Zarah, but they're good people. So, it's all about reciprocity. If they don't return our lost objects, we don't return their lost objects. Yes, the theology is a problem, but they're not. Chazal spoke about certain people that we have to relate to them differently. And he says that those people who are bound by civilized behavior are not the Oved Avodah Zarah that Chazal spoke about with all the terrible things. So he removed it from theology, basically, and turned it into a moral category. And Indian, all these people, they're good people, etc. They don't fall in that category. Okay, so if you worship many gods, but you're a decent person, your theology is the problem, but you're not the Oved Avodah Zarah, the evil, wicked person. Okay, good enough. So Rabbi Riskin says, so for us in the modern Orthodox world, we accept the Meiri's opinion. That's like the basic. So there's a flip side to this. Remember, for Meiri, it's not the theology, it's the actions. So according to this conception, if you're like Hamas type of person or that, supporter of terrorism, your theology is completely pure. You believe in one God. But remember, it's not about theology, it's about actions. Therefore, the irony is, the paradox is, Dafka, the Ovdei Avodah Zarah today, that Chazal warned us about, are Dafka monotheists. Wow. And what practical implications does it have? Maybe how to fight a war. He says you can't go into their mosques. There's all sorts of practical implications. And the truth is that they've created, what was the classic example of Avodah Zarah in the ancient times? The cult of Molech. Which, the Ramban says it's literal, that it's a widow sacrifice of children. They created their own cult of Molech. Not only do they kill their own children, they kill our children with them. So, now, I don't know if this is true. There's a rabbi in Boston, Rabbi Clapper, who disagrees with how Riskin reads this, but it's an interesting point that if you're consistent, if it's not about theology, and of course it's unfortunate. Islam is the closest religion, theologically, I guess, to Judaism, and that we'd be stuck
So
with
we're
this
not throwing
situation.
all of Islam into
And
this
I
problem.
will also say, that's the next point I always make, is that, and we also can't fall into the trap that I think all Muslims, on the contrary, yes, there's a problem. We can't deny the problem. If it's only 10%, let's say, I mean, that's a problem. It's gonna
Maybe
be
1%, maybe.
No, I mean of supporters, not just of actives.
Mm.
It could be a problem of let's say, I mean, so we're talking about 100 million people, but the idea that I work with Muslims, I lead trips, I have all sorts of relationships with Muslims, and this idea that many Jews, in particular in the Orthodox world, have fallen into this trap by making these judgments. I mean, India. You know, I mean, Muslims are in India. I mean, yes, there's a problem. We have in the Arab world in particular a problem, but so I think that's something we need to be careful about.
What about Jewish
But let me just add, it's following up on Rabbi Riskin's point, is that for a long time we were convinced that there was maybe no idolatry left in the world. You know, Chazal told us about, because today we say everyone's Shituf. If Shituf, the Israeli chief rabbinate has declared that and I can send this to anyone who's interested, that Hinduism is monotheism. Hindus all say they're monotheists. It's just one God with different manifestations. So if Christianity is Shituf and Hinduism is Shituf, then really there is no Avodah Zarah. But if you adopt this reading of the Meiri, then, Chazal, who warned us against that some people, we just can't extend the ties of brotherhood to, that there's going to be these people that unfortunately we do have in our time. But again, this needs to be stressed again, just really mention it, that we have a problem in the Orthodox world that there's we don't want people to judge us by our extremists and our things, and we have to be very careful. There's, the overwhelming majority of Muslims don't buy into this. What I will say, though, it's become more problematic, is that post-October 7th, you find more and more, I find among people I know, where they're ready to condemn October 7th is a terrible thing, but they also say, but you have to see it in context. You can't just condemn October 7th. You have to condemn what came before. So that's a problem, and it's made it much more difficult to have Jewish-Muslim dialogue. But in terms of the idea that they all want to kill us, it's not true. It's not true at all. And I've had amazing stories of my times in the Muslim world. Yeah,
I think we do have to be honest. Like some
One
people
second,
say,
one
like
second.
every Lubavitcher is a Mashiachist if you really push him to the wall. Every Muslim wants Sharia law to be introduced. Ultimately, that's their hope. We don't have those kinds of.
First of all, a lot of Muslims don't want Sharia law because they're not so religious. But even though
I'm talking about the religion.
So what is the Pew study did a poll on this? But what does Sharia law mean? Sharia law. I mean, there's no country in the Muslim world, basically, a couple of them, Saudi Arabia, Iran, that has complete Sharia law. But the idea that they support, but we know, for example, we have a big problem in the Palestinian territories. The study showed 70%, let's say, 80% supported Hamas. So we need to distinguish. It's, the Palestinians have one view, the Indonesians have a different view, and we can't win this war ourselves. We need allies in the Muslim world. We need allies both because of the secularism that's coming up against religion, attacks on Shechita and circumcision, and also just, the Jews are a small people in the land of Israel, and the Muslim countries are also facing this threat. So I think Israel understands this. We have to build bridges, exactly.
The Muslims you work with are Arabs or?
We have Muslims in my school. They asked me last year to speak at an event. I represent